One letter changed the next year of Brendan Sorsby's football life. Not a bad practice report, not a poor scouting grade, not a team choosing another quarterback. A letter. The National Football League informed Sorsby and every team that there would be no supplemental draft in 2026. That meant the former Indiana, Cincinnati, and Texas Tech quarterback could not use one of football's rarest entry paths to get into the league this season, and that is why this story is bigger than one player getting punished. This is a story about the modern football pipeline. It is about what happens when a college career is closed by gambling violations, when a legal fight does not restore eligibility, when a player tries to use the professional system as a second path, and when the National Football League says no. It is also about something football is still trying to figure out. Sports betting is everywhere around the game now. It is in broadcasts, it is in sponsorships, it is in apps on phones. It is part of the modern sports business. But for players, coaches, and leagues, gambling on the game still sits at the edge of everything football cannot afford to lose: trust, competition integrity. The belief that what happens on the field is real. That is the tension around Brendan Sorsby. On one side, the league can say it is protecting the integrity of football. On the other side, Sorsby's camp can say a player who entered treatment, lost his college eligibility, and tried to move forward had another door closed. This is not a simple villain story. It is not just a scandal story. It is a football system story. And to understand why the National Football League closed the door, you have to start before the letter. You have to start with the player. Brendan Sorsby was not some random name trying to sneak into a roster spot. He had built real football interest. He started his college career at Indiana. After redshirting in 2022, he started 10 games in 2023 and showed the kind of dual threat traits that make scouts keep watching. He threw for more than 1,500 yards, ran for more than 270, and accounted for 19 total touchdowns. Then he transferred to Cincinnati. That is where the profile grew. In 2024, he started every game and produced more than 2,800 passing yards, 18 passing touchdowns, more than 440 rushing yards, and 9 rushing touchdowns. In 2025, he built on it again. More than 2,800 passing yards, 27 passing touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 580 rushing yards, 9 more scores on the ground. Second team, all Big 12 recognition. A profile that looked like a real college football rise. That matters because the stakes of this story are not abstract. Sorsby had become the kind of quarterback who had a future to discuss. Maybe not a locked-in first-round player, maybe not a sure thing, but a productive, athletic quarterback with size, movement ability, passing growth, and enough college production to create National Football League interest. Then he transferred again, this time to Texas Tech. The move came with big expectations, big attention, and reportedly significant name, image, and likeness money. The exact numbers matter less than the bigger point. He was not just transferring to compete. He was transferring as a major college football asset, a quarterback with production, a quarterback with market value, a quarterback with professional dreams still alive. And then the story turned. In April of 2026, Sorsby publicly announced that he was taking an indefinite leave from Texas Tech to enter residential treatment for gambling addiction. That part has to be handled carefully. The public record says treatment was announced. The public record says gambling addiction was part of the explanation. What we should not do is speculate about private medical details, recovery progress, or what was happening behind closed doors. But we can say this clearly. By the time the eligibility case became public, this was not only about a football violation. It was also about a player who had entered treatment, a school trying to handle a serious situation, and governing bodies deciding where accountability begins and where support fits. Then came the National Collegiate Athletic Association ruling. The reported scale of the gambling violations was massive. At least $90,000 wagered, more than 9,000 bets. And the most serious detail, some of the bets involved his own team context, including Indiana football while he was a member of that program, although reporting says not in games he played. There were also reported bets involving other college sports, including Indiana and Cincinnati men's basketball. That is where the integrity question becomes unavoidable, because leagues do not treat all gambling violations the same emotionally, even when every violation matters. A player betting on a professional basketball game is one thing. A player betting in ways connected to his own team or school environment is something else entirely. The closer the bet gets to the athlete's own locker room, the more dangerous it becomes for the game. That is why the National Collegiate Athletic Association ruled Sorsby permanently ineligible. That ruling effectively ended his college football path, unless the legal system changed it. So Sorsby challenged it. He sued the National Collegiate Athletic Association, arguing that the permanent ban did not properly account for his welfare and situation. A Texas judge granted temporary relief, which created a brief moment where it looked like he might still be able to play in 2026 after a shorter suspension. But that moment did not last. The Big 12 and the National Collegiate Athletic Association opposed the eligibility restoration. The lawsuit was later dismissed with prejudice. In normal language, that means the case could not simply be filed again in the same way. The college door closed again. No Texas Tech season, no restored eligibility, no clean path back through the National Collegiate Athletic Association. And that is when the rarest door in football became the next focus. The supplemental draft. Most fans have heard of the National Football League draft. Almost nobody spends time thinking about the supplemental draft, because most years it barely matters. The supplemental draft exists for players who missed the regular draft, but had unexpected eligibility issues or circumstances that changed after the normal deadline. It is not a normal second draft. It is not an annual showcase. It is not something teams treat like a summer bonus event. Since 1977, only a small number of players have actually been selected through it. The last player selected was Jalen Thompson by the Arizona Cardinals in 2019. There was a supplemental draft in 2023, but no player was picked. The process is simple in theory. A player petitions for eligibility. If the league holds the supplemental draft, teams can bid future draft capital. If a team uses a fourth-round supplemental pick, it loses a fourth-round pick in the next regular draft. So there is a real cost. But the key detail is this. The National Football League does not have to hold a supplemental draft every year. And in 2026, the league said it would not. That is the letter that changed the entire story. The league told Sorsby and all 32 teams that no supplemental draft would be held. It also pointed to the timing of his application, the lack of supporting documentation, the fact that there were no other applicants, and the seriousness of the underlying gambling conduct. According to reporting on the letter, the league framed participation in the National Football League as a privilege with responsibilities. It raised concerns around integrity, accountability, and the way Sorsby had tried to fight the National Collegiate Athletic Association ruling before turning to the supplemental draft. Sorsby's attorney, Jeffrey Kessler, pushed back hard and called the decision a violation of the collective bargaining agreement and the law, while indicating the issue would be pursued with the National Football League Players Association. That is the conflict. The league says it does not have to create a special 2026 entry path. Sorsby's side says the league blocked a professional opportunity. And for fans, the key question is this. Was the National Football League protecting the game, or was it closing the last realistic door for a player trying to move forward? If you start with the gambling conduct, the league's position is easy to understand. Football cannot survive if fans believe players are betting around their own teams. The entire sport depends on trust. Every snap has to feel legitimate. Every injury report has to feel clean. Every line movement, every late game decision, every strange play call, every turnover, every player mistake, all of it becomes more suspicious if leagues allow gambling violations near competition to look negotiable. That is why the own team detail matters so much. That is why the volume matters. That is why the league's concern was not just about whether Sorsby could throw a football. It was about whether allowing him into a special draft path in 2026 would send the wrong signal about accountability. But if you start with the human timeline, the story feels different. Here is a quarterback who had built real football value. He entered treatment, he lost his college eligibility, he fought the ruling, he lost that fight. Then he tried the one remaining National Football League mechanism that could have opened a door for 2026, and the league said no. That does not erase the violations, it does not make the conduct small, but it does raise a legitimate second question. If a player faces consequences, enters treatment, and tries to continue his career, what does a realistic second chance actually look like? That is where this story becomes uncomfortable, because the National Football League has every reason to protect integrity, but football as an ecosystem also has to decide what rehabilitation means. Is it enough to say, come back in 2027? Is that fair because the conduct was serious? Is it too harsh because the player already lost his college season, his Texas Tech opportunity, and immediate professional access? That is the debate, not whether gambling rules matter. They obviously do. The debate is where the line goes after punishment has already started, and the timing of this case makes the conversation even bigger because sports betting is not some shadow world outside football anymore. It is part of the sports economy. Fans see odds on broadcasts. They hear betting segments. They watch sponsored content. They live in an environment where betting language is attached to games constantly. The National Football League also has sportsbook partnerships and a larger business environment where betting is part of modern sports media. That does not mean players can bet. That does not make player gambling acceptable, but it does create a public tension. The league can monetize betting interest while telling players the line is absolute. Both things can be true at once. That is why critics call it a mixed message, and that is why the league has to be so strict. Because once betting becomes part of the business, the league has even more pressure to prove the games are protected. The closer betting gets to the sport, the more severe the guardrails have to be for players and staff. So the National Football League can argue that this is exactly why it had to say no. If the league wants fans to believe the game is clean, it cannot look flexible when a case involves thousands of bets and own team context. But Sorsby's side can still argue that the system is leaving no practical path forward in 2026. That is the heart of the story. Integrity versus opportunity. Accountability versus rehabilitation. A rare football mechanism versus a league choosing not to use it. And that brings us to the path that might be left. If the National Football League is closed for 2026 and college football is closed, where does Sorsby go? The first answer people brought up was the United Football League. Mike Ripoll publicly showed interest in giving him an opportunity, and that matters because spring football is becoming more than a side note. It can be a real football bridge. Players have used spring football to get fresh tape, stay in game shape, earn workouts, and rebuild professional interest. Those stories do not guarantee anything for Sorsby. Quarterback is different. The scrutiny is different. The gambling case is different. But the larger point is real. Alternative football leagues are becoming more important because the main pipeline is crowded, expensive, and unforgiving. The transfer portal creates movement. Name, image, and likeness. Money creates pressure. Eligibility rules create hard lines. The National Football League draft has limited slots. And if a player falls out of the normal path, the football world needs somewhere for that player to keep playing, keep proving, and maybe earn another evaluation. That is why the United Football League angle belongs in this story, but only as a supporting layer. This is not really a United Football League video. It is a video about what happens when the normal doors close. Private training is possible. Preparing for the 2027 National Football League draft is possible. A legal challenge through the National Football League Players Association is possible. But none of those options are the same as playing meaningful football in 2026. A year of development, film, rhythm, and reputation may disappear, and for a quarterback that matters. Quarterbacks need reps, live defenses, timing, pressure, and evidence. If Sorsby enters the 2027 draft process without a 2026 season, teams will not only evaluate the gambling case, they will evaluate the gap. They will ask what he did during the year away. They will ask who vouched for him. They will ask whether the risk is worth the talent. So, where does this leave the story? The National Football League had a defensible reason to protect its integrity standard. The gambling violations were serious. The reported scale was huge. The own team element is the kind of thing football cannot treat lightly. The league also had no obligation to hold a supplemental draft just because one player wanted a new entry path. But there is also a human side that cannot be ignored. Sorsby entered treatment. He lost his college career. He lost the immediate National Football League route. He is now trying to rebuild a future without the normal structures most prospects rely on. That does not make him a victim of nothing. It makes him a case study in how unforgiving the modern football pipeline can be once trust is broken. And maybe that is the real lesson. The supplemental draft is not a back door you can count on. The transfer portal does not protect you from eligibility rules. Name, image, and likeness. Money does not shield a player from conduct consequences. Treatment can be real, and accountability can still be real. Sports betting can be legal for fans and still be dangerous for players. Football can offer second chances, but not always on the timeline a player wants. Before we close, this is exactly why FootballRealm exists inside the GameplanByDylon ecosystem. The goal is not just to react to headlines. It is to build repeatable systems that take a football story, research the timeline, organize the sources, separate what is confirmed from what is unknown, and explain why the story matters to normal fans. That same idea is behind the wider GameplanByDylon product store, where the focus is building prompt systems that help people think, plan, create, and organize better. So the Brendan Sorsby question is not just, did he get blocked? The real question is what the block tells us. It tells us that the National Football League will protect the integrity line when gambling touches the game. It tells us the supplemental draft is not a guaranteed escape hatch. It tells us alternative leagues may matter more as football careers become less linear. And it tells us that treatment, accountability, and second chances are all part of the same uncomfortable conversation. Do you think the National Football League was right to refuse a supplemental draft here to protect integrity and accountability standards? Or should Brendan Sorsby have been allowed a professional opportunity in 2026 after losing his college eligibility and entering treatment? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want more football stories explained without the hot take noise, subscribe to FootballRealm and join the realm.